She handed him a bucket and told him to wash her boyfriend's car in their own driveway. Not privately, not quietly. In front of her mother, her brothers, and every neighbor on the block who happened to glance out a window that Saturday morning. She stood on the porch and watched, and the man she had spent 12 years treating like a burden did exactly what she asked. No argument, no visible anger, no reaction at all. Just a quiet man, a bucket of soapy water, and a silver Porsche Cayenne that did not belong to him. What his wife did not know, but it in what none of them standing on that porch could have imagined, was that the man washing that car controlled $95 billion in land, and that the owner of that Porsche had been begging for 8 months, for that same quiet man's permission to build the project that was supposed to make him rich. She humiliated the one man whose signature her boyfriend needed to survive. What happens when the person you treated like the help turns out to own the ground everyone else is standing on? If this is your first time here, hit that like button right now and subscribe. We drop stories like this every single week. And we want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments, or we read every single one. Now let me take you all the way back to that Saturday morning in June, to a driveway in Cascade Heights, Atlanta, where a man named Everett Coles picked up a chamois cloth and decided, without saying a single word, that today was the last day of a very long patience. But the morning Everett Coles was asked to wash another man's car, the temperature in Cascade Heights was already climbing past 83 degrees before 9 o'clock, and the air sat heavy and still like it had nowhere to be. He had been in the backyard since 7:30, running a footwork drill he used with his junior varsity boys. Cone to cone, plant, pivot, repeat, moving his body the way he always did on Saturday mornings when the house felt like something to escape rather than a place to rest. The grass was damp under his sneakers. Gospel radio drifted from the kitchen window of the house next door. Everett Coles was a man who had learned to find his peace in the margins of his own life, and Saturday mornings were his. He heard the Porsche before he saw it. The engine had that particular idle, low and assured, the mechanical sound of money that has never had to explain itself. Everett walked around the side of the house just as the silver Cayenne rolled to a stop in the driveway, and he registered 3 things in the space of a single breath. Vanessa was already on the porch, dressed and pressed like she had somewhere important to be. Patricia was beside her, holding a glass of sweet tea, wearing the expression she reserved for moments she intended to remember. And Damon and Theo were arranged along the porch, railing the way men arrange themselves when they are there to watch something and want to be certain they have a good angle. Sterling Price stepped out of the Porsche and stood beside it, the way men like Sterling always stood beside things they owned, unhurried, letting the object complete the sentence his presence had started. He was broad-shouldered and tailored, even on a Saturday, linen shirt open at the collar, a watch on his wrist that caught the June light, and threw it back. He looked at Everett the way you look at something that is in your way but not worth addressing directly. Vanessa smiled down from the porch, not at Everett, at Sterling. "Baby," she said, and the word landed the way she intended it to, soft and final as a door closing. Show Sterling some hospitality. The man drove all the way from Stone Mountain. Sterling extended the keys without ceremony, arm out, eyes already drifting toward the porch. Not an ask, not even a request. Just an expectation hanging in the hot morning air, waiting to see whether Everett Coles would do what everyone standing there already believed he would do. Everett took the keys. He walked to the side of the house, filled the bucket from the outdoor spigot, and came back with a chamois cloth over his shoulder. He worked from the hood backward, the way his father had taught him a car deserved to be washed, methodically, without shortcuts, giving each panel its full attention. Theo said something low to Damon on the porch. Damon made a sound in his throat that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family. Patricia took a long, slow sip of her sweet tea. Everett kept his eyes on the car. It was when he worked the cloth along the passenger window that he saw the folder on the seat. Cream-coloured government weight paper, a blue stamp across the top corner. He was not trying to read it. He was not looking for anything. But the words were large, and the window was clean, and his eyes moved across them the way eyes always move across text when text is present. Southern Logistics Corridor, Site Acquisition, Phase 2. He straightened up slowly. He wrung the cloth out over the bucket. His face did not change. He knew those words, not from the news, not from his students' current events presentations, or the Atlanta Business Chronicle that sometimes landed on the break room table at school. He knew those words from a letter that had been sitting unopened on the corner of his home office desk for 6 weeks, tucked under a coupon mailer and a basketball tournament bracket, its return address printed in clean serif font. Webb and Carmichael, attorneys at law, Atlanta, Georgia. He had set that letter aside, meaning to deal with it later, and he had been meaning to deal with it for a month and a half. Everett finished the rear quarter panel. He took the bucket to the side of the house, emptied it into the grass, and hung the chamois cloth over the spigot handle to dry. Patricia's voice carried across the driveway, aimed at Theo, pitched just loud enough to be heard by anyone not meant to respond to it. "At least he's useful for something," she said. Theo gave a low sound of agreement. The porch held its shape around them. Satisfied, Sterling came down the steps, took his keys from the spot where Everett had set them on the hood, and gave the car a single approving glance before folding himself back inside. The engine turned over. The Cayenne reversed out of the driveway and was gone. Vanessa went inside without looking back. Everett stood in the empty driveway for a long moment, the June heat pressing down on his shoulders, the neighborhood quiet again around him. He was not thinking about Vanessa. He was not thinking about Sterling's watch or Theo's laugh or the particular quality of contempt Patricia had perfected over 12 years of Sunday dinners. He was thinking about a folder on a passenger seat and a letter on a desk and 4 words he had read in 2 places at once. He turned and walked into the house. To understand what that Saturday morning in June truly meant, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back 12 years to the first Sunday dinner Everett Coles ever ate at Patricia Beaumont Washington's table, because that was the night the terms of his marriage were set. Not by vow or ceremony, but by the particular way Patricia passed him the rolls without looking at him. Everett had grown up in Macon, the son of a mechanic and a woman who taught 3rd grade for 31 years. He was not a man who spoke much about himself, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had been raised to believe that a man's life spoke louder than his mouth. He had put himself through school, earned his history degree, taken a teaching position at Westview High in southwest Atlanta, and built something steady and quiet. He loved the game of basketball the way some men love prayer, not for the spectacle of it, but for the discipline it required, the way it rewarded patience over flash. His junior varsity boys knew he would never raise his voice at them. They also knew he was not a man to disappoint. And he met Vanessa at a mutual friend's cookout in the summer of 2012. She was bright and sharp and beautiful, and she laughed at something he said before he had finished saying it, which felt like a kind of miracle. He did not know then what the Beaumont Washington name meant to the people who carried it. He learned at that first Sunday dinner. Patricia had set a table that announced itself. The good china, the pressed tablecloth, the sweet potato pie cooling on the counter that was clearly not for everyone. Damon was already seated when Everett arrived, and he shook Everett's hand the way you shake the hand of someone you are sizing up and have already measured. Theo was younger and less careful about hiding it. And Patricia kissed Vanessa on the cheek, and then turned to Everett with a smile that was warm in the way that a door held open just long enough to let the cold in is warm. "So you teach school," she said. Not a question. A file being opened, that was 2012. By Christmas of 2016, the file had grown considerably thicker. Vanessa's cousin Reginald had just been made a regional director at a logistics firm in Charlotte, and Patricia announced it at the dinner table the way she announced all achievements that belonged to other people. Slowly, with satisfaction, letting each detail land. Reginald was 34. Reginald had a company car. Reginald was doing something with his life that translated into numbers Patricia could recite. She did not look at Everett when she said any of it. She did not have to. Damon refilled his glass. Old Theo nodded along. Vanessa said nothing, which by 2016 had become her primary contribution to these moments. Everett ate his food and said the turkey was good because it was. The next wound came in the spring of 2019, and this one was Vanessa's alone. She had been promoted to assistant principal at Westview Academy, which was a real achievement, a thing Everett was genuinely proud of. He found out about it the way he found out about most things by then, after the fact, from someone else's telling. Vanessa had called her mother first, then Damon, then 3 of her closest friends, and then thought to mention it to her husband sometime on a Thursday evening between checking her email and starting a bath. Everett congratulated her. He meant it. She accepted it the way you accept congratulations from the dry cleaner, politely, from a distance. The cruelest moment came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday in February 2021 when Everett overheard Patricia on the phone in Vanessa's kitchen, voice low but not low enough. "I just worry about Vanessa," Patricia was saying. "She's smart, she's capable, she could have had anything, but she settled for her situation." She was quiet for a moment. Oh, then, "You know what I mean by her situation." He was standing 6 feet away, holding 2 mugs of coffee he had made for both of them. He set Vanessa's mug on the counter and took his back to the living room. By 2022, Vanessa had moved her things into the guest room, which she called a temporary arrangement, in the same tone she used for everything she had already decided was permanent. Their social calendars had long since separated. She went to events with her family. He went to his boys' playoff games. They shared a house the way 2 tenants share a waiting room, cordially, without conversation, each aware the other is there. Sterling Price entered Vanessa's life at a Westview Academy fundraiser in the fall of 2023. Everett was not there. He had a Tuesday practice. By the time he noticed Vanessa coming home later, dressing differently, is holding her phone at a new angle when she typed, the thing was already in motion. She stopped wearing her wedding ring sometime in March of 2024. Not dramatically, not as a statement. She simply stopped putting it on, the way you stop winding a clock you no longer need to keep. Everett noticed the morning it happened. He noticed every morning after. He said nothing, because what looked like resignation from the outside was something else entirely from where Everett Coles was standing. It was patience. It was the specific, practiced quiet of a man who had been carrying something heavy and private for a very long time, and had simply not yet decided to set it down. Elijah Coles was not a man who talked about what he had. He was a man who talked about what he had done, and even then, only when asked directly, and even then, only in the fewest words the situation would allow. Everett had understood this about his grandfather from childhood, the way Elijah moved through the world with a particular stillness, the way he sat at the head of his kitchen table in Macon like a man who had already accounted for every room in the house and found everything in its proper place. He wore clean work clothes even when he wasn't working. He kept his land records in a fireproof box under the floorboards of his back bedroom, and he checked them every first Sunday of the month the way other men checked the weather. Elijah Coles did not trust spectacle. He trusted paperwork. The land had started with a single parcel in 1938, 40 acres of red Georgia clay that nobody else wanted at a price nobody else was offering. Elijah had been 19 years old and had saved every dollar he earned from 3 years of timber work in the hills outside Macon. He bought that first parcel with cash, paid in full, and walked the boundary lines himself on a Tuesday morning before anyone else was awake. Over the next 3 decades, he added to it the way a patient man adds to anything, steadily, without announcement, one acquisition following another whenever the opportunity arrived and the price was right. He bought parcels that flooded seasonally and parcels that other families had let go in hard years. He bought timber rights when they came available and held them like instruments that would eventually play. In 1967, one of those timber rights negotiations returned a settlement of $480,000, a staggering sum for that era, but for any era for a black man in Georgia holding a deed that the county recorder had processed with barely concealed reluctance. Elijah deposited the money quietly, bought 3 more parcels, and told no one outside the family. By 1971, when he stopped acquiring and started simply holding, Elijah Coles owned 1,400 acres of Georgia land spread across 3 counties. He formed the Coles Family Land Trust in 1974 with the help of an attorney in Atlanta, structured it as a blind trust with a designated sole trustee, and named that trustee in a sealed instruction delivered to his estate attorney in Macon with one condition: the instruction was not to be opened until his death. Elijah died in the spring of 2002. He was 83 years old and he died in his own bed, which was exactly what he had arranged. Or Everett was 22 when he sat across from the estate attorney in that Macon office, in a chair that felt too large for what he was being told. The attorney was a careful man named Horace Dupree, who had managed Elijah's affairs for 20 years and had the practiced calm of someone who had delivered overwhelming news before and understood that the appropriate response was to deliver it slowly and then wait. He explained the trust structure. He explained the 1,400 acres. He explained the valuation as of that year, a number that Everett made him repeat twice, not because he hadn't heard it, but because hearing it once didn't make it real. He explained that Everett was now the sole trustee and sole beneficiary of the Coles Family Land Trust, and that this was not a request or an invitation, but a legal designation made 28 years prior by a man who had chosen him specifically and deliberately. Then Horace Dupree slid a single handwritten page across the desk. Elijah had written it himself. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, every letter formed with the attention of a man who knew the words mattered. It said, "Hold it, don't perform it, let it work quietly. A man who needs the world to know what he has doesn't really have it. He's just borrowing it until someone takes it back." Everett had read those words in that chair in 2002 and understood them completely, because they sounded exactly like his grandfather's voice, and his grandfather's voice had always sounded like the truth. He had kept the trust secret from that day forward. Not from shame, and not from strategy, from philosophy. He taught his classes and coached his boys and lived his life, and the land sat in Georgia doing what land does when no one is performing ownership of it. Appreciating, quietly, enormously, in the direction of a city that kept expanding outward toward it like a slow and inevitable tide. He came back to the present on a Sunday evening in June, sitting at his home office desk with the overhead light on and the house quiet around him. The letter from Webb and Carmichael had been there for 6 weeks, half buried under a tournament bracket and a grocery store mailer. He pulled it free and opened it with his thumb. Langston Webb's letterhead. Clean, formal, brief. He, the trust, had received a Phase 2 letter of intent from Price and Associates Commercial Partners regarding the Southern Logistics Corridor site acquisition. The LOI included $2.2 million in non-refundable earnest money already deposited. Trustee instruction was requested within 30 days. Everett read the name of the company. He read it again. Price and Associates Commercial Partners. He set the letter down on the desk. He turned and looked through the window toward the driveway, where the concrete was still damp in the shape of a silver Porsche that had long since driven away. Sterling Price had been negotiating for Elijah's land for 8 months. He had been sitting across from lawyers and filing paperwork and depositing earnest money, all in pursuit of a signature from a trust whose beneficiary had, just that morning, washed his car. Everett sat with that for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in nearly 2 years. Pacing begins to accelerate from this chapter forward. The slow burn is over. The offices of Webb and Carmichael occupied the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street that had been there long enough to feel permanent, the kind of address that communicated stability without announcing it. Everett arrived 7 minutes early, which was his habit, and sat in the waiting area with his hands folded and his face composed. A receptionist offered him coffee. He declined. He had not slept well, but he did not look like a man who had not slept well. He looked like a man waiting for information he had already decided how to use. Langston Webb came out to meet him personally, which told Everett something about how seriously the firm regarded the trust's affairs. Webb was 58 years old and carried himself with the particular authority of a man who had spent 3 decades in rooms where enormous things were decided quietly. His handshake was firm and brief. He led Everett into a conference room with a long mahogany table, 2 bottles of water, and a folder thick enough to require both hands. Webb sat down, opened the folder, and got directly to it. The Coles Family Land Trust, as of the most recent independent appraisal commissioned 18 months prior, held assets valued at $95.4 billion. And the primary driver of that valuation was not the 1,400 acres in aggregate. It was 340 specific acres sitting in the direct path of the Hartsfield-Jackson Southern Logistics Corridor, a $12 billion federal infrastructure project whose site acquisition phase had been moving through Department of Transportation channels for the past 2 years. Webb had the appraisal report, the DOT corridor maps, and the site acquisition timeline laid out in sequence on the table in front of Everett, each document numbered, each figure highlighted in the margin. Everett looked at the number. He had known the trust's approximate value for years, in the way a man knows the balance of an account he has chosen not to touch, but $95.4 billion was a different thing to read in a formal document than to hold abstractly in the mind. He kept his face still. Webb continued. Price and Associates Commercial Partners had submitted a binding letter of intent 8 months prior through the trust's blind structure, meaning Sterling's attorneys had been negotiating with Webb's office without any knowledge of who sat on the other side of the table. Could the LOI included $2.2 million in non-refundable earnest money already deposited and held in escrow? The 30-day window for trustee response, meaning Everett's response, had been extended twice at the petitioner's request. It currently expired in 19 days. Webb slid a second document across the table. It was a summary of Price & Associates' publicly filed financial commitments tied to the corridor project. Sterling had leveraged the anticipated land use contract to secure a $40 million construction line of credit from a regional commercial lender. The credit facility had been approved on the condition that the corridor contract was executed within 90 days of the LOI closing. Without the contract, the credit facility would be called. Everett asked his first question. If the trust withdraws from the LOI, what happens to the earnest money? Webb answered without hesitation. Per the terms of the LOI, which the trust's prior counsel had negotiated with considerable care, a trustee withdrawal for any reason forfeited the earnest money in full to the trust. No contest period, no arbitration clause. The $2.2 million would transfer within 10 business days of written withdrawal notice. Everett asked his second question. What happens to the corridor contract if we withdraw? The Department of Transportation's acquisition timeline required a signed land use agreement within a fixed window. If the trust withdrew, the DOT would issue a competitive rebid to qualified alternative developers. Webb's assessment, based on conversations with a DOT liaison, was that the rebid process would take no fewer than 60 days and that Price & Associates, having already burned its position on this parcel, would be categorically ineligible to re-enter. Everett asked his third question. Is there any legal mechanism by which Price & Associates could compel the trust to proceed? Webb looked at him steadily. No, the trust's withdrawal right was unconditional. Sterling's attorneys had attempted to insert a performance clause during early negotiations. Webb's predecessor counsel had removed it. The LOI, as executed, was entirely one-sided in the trust's favor. The room held the particular silence of a place where the outcome of something large has just become clear. Webb folded his hands on the table. Everett, he said, how would you like to proceed? Everett sat quietly for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then he asked Webb for a complete summary of everything Price & Associates had publicly committed to. Press releases, financing announcements, any statements made to the media or to creditors in connection with the corridor project. Webb said he could have it prepared by end of day. Everett nodded. He stood, straightened his jacket, and picked up the folder Webb had assembled. It was heavy in his hands. Not the weight of paper. The weight of what the paper contained. He thanked Langston Webb, thanked the receptionist by name on his way out, and walked to the elevator with the same unhurried stride he had carried into the building. He did not open the folder in the elevator. He did not open it in the lobby, and he carried it through the Peachtree Street morning, past the coffee carts and the suited commuters and the city moving around him at its usual speed, and he placed it carefully on the passenger seat of his Honda Pilot and drove home. He didn't open it until he was sitting at his desk in the quiet of his home office with a glass of water and the afternoon light coming through the window. And when he did, the plan came together so quickly it almost surprised him. Almost. Everett went back to Webb 3 days later. Not with questions this time. With a decision. He sat down across from Langston Webb in the same conference room, in the same chair, and he laid out what he wanted in 4 sentences. He wanted the trust to formally withdraw from the letter of intent with Price & Associates commercial partners, but he wanted the withdrawal notice to contain no explanation, no stated reason, and no invitation to negotiate. He wanted the $2.2 million in forfeited earnest money processed according to the LOI terms. and he wanted none of this to bear his name in any communication directed to Sterling Price's office. Webb listened without interrupting. When Everett finished, Webb nodded once and said he would have the withdrawal notice drafted by end of week. It took 2 days, not 5. Webb's office was efficient when the instructions were clear, and Everett's instructions had been exceptionally clear. The document arrived by secure courier to Everett's home on a Wednesday evening. 4 pages of legal language that said, in essence, one precise and devastating thing. The trust was out. Everett read it twice, found nothing to change. Tian signed his name at the bottom with the same steady hand he used to write his students' names in his gradebook. He returned the signed notice to Webb's office the following morning. Then he drove to school and taught 2 sections of American history. It was Webb, during a brief follow-up call that same week, who raised the matter of the divorce. He raised it carefully, the way a careful man raises something that is outside his area of practice, but directly adjacent to it. He noted that the trust, as a marital asset subject to disclosure in any divorce proceeding, would require formal valuation if Everett chose to file. He recommended Everett speak with a family law attorney before the withdrawal notice landed on Sterling's desk, simply to ensure the sequencing was sound. Everett had already thought about this, and he had been thinking about it since the night he opened the letter and read Sterling's company name for the 2nd time. He called Renata Okafor the next morning. Okafor Family Law had an office in Buckhead, and Renata had a reputation that preceded her, not for aggression, but for settlements that were so precisely constructed they were essentially impossible to contest. She met with Everett for 90 minutes. She asked the necessary questions. She reviewed the trust summary Webb had prepared. She set her pen down and told Everett that the Coles Family Land Trust, as a pre-marital inherited asset held in a blind structure, had strong arguments for separate property classification, but that its disclosure in the divorce filing would still require a formal appraisal, and that Vanessa's counsel would see the number. Or Everett told her to proceed. He filed for divorce on a Friday, quietly, through Okafor's office, with no announcement, no confrontation, no conversation with Vanessa. The papers were prepared, filed with the court, and placed in the hands of a process server. Vanessa was not yet served. That would come in its own time, in its own sequence, and the sequence mattered. The withdrawal notice left Webb's office the following Thursday. It travelled by certified mail and courier to the registered legal address of Price and Associates Commercial Partners in downtown Atlanta, addressed to Sterling's attorney of record. It arrived at approximately 10:15 in the morning. Everett was standing at his whiteboard at 10:15 on that Thursday morning, drawing a timeline of the Reconstruction era for his 3rd period class. In the room smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria cornbread drifting up from 2 floors below. His students had their notebooks open. One of them in the back row was trying to sleep with his eyes partially open, which Everett had noticed and chosen to address after the lesson. He wrote the dates in sequence. He explained the significance of each one. He answered a question from a girl in the front row who always asked the best questions and knew it. He did not think about Sterling Price. He did not need to. Across town, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the downtown skyline that Sterling had chosen specifically for what it communicated about him, a phone began to ring. Sterling's attorney had opened the certified envelope, read the 4 pages twice, and reached immediately for the phone. Sterling did not answer the first call. He was in a meeting. His assistant put the attorney through to his cell. Sterling stepped out of the meeting with the particular irritation of a man who expects the interruption to be minor. It was not minor. The attorney read him the relevant language from the withdrawal notice. Sterling asked him to read it again. The attorney did. Sterling stood in the hallway outside his conference room with the phone pressed to his ear, and the hallway felt, suddenly, like a much smaller space than it had 30 seconds prior. The $2.2 million was gone. The corridor contract was gone. The $40 million credit line was now in question. Sterling's attorney told him there was no grounds to contest. Sterling told his attorney to find grounds anyway. His attorney said he would look. Both of them understood, in the way professionals understand things they do not say aloud, that there was nothing to find. Everett's third period class ended at 11:20. He erased the whiteboard, collected the day's exit tickets, and walked to the faculty lounge to eat the lunch he had packed that morning. Turkey on wheat, an apple, a thermos of coffee his mother had given him for his last birthday. He sat down at the table by the window. He ate his lunch. By Friday morning, one domino had already fallen, and Sterling Price had no idea that it was only the first. The dominoes fell faster than anyone could have stopped them. Day 1. Sterling Price sat at his desk and read the withdrawal notice 3 times. His attorney had already called. The language was unambiguous, the contract terms were airtight, and the $2.2 million in earnest money was gone. Not delayed, not in dispute. Gone. Sterling told his attorney to find a challenge. His attorney told him there was no challenge to find. Sterling hung up and sat in his expensive chair in his expensive office and stared at a skyline that had, in the space of one certified letter, stopped belonging to him in the way it had that morning. He called Vanessa. She told him not to worry. She said these things happened in business. She did not know what she was talking about, and Sterling knew it, but he needed someone to say something reassuring, and she was what he had. Week 2. The Department of Transportation awarded the Southern Logistics Corridor contract to a competing developer, a firm out of Charlotte that had been positioned as a secondary bidder for months. The announcement ran in the Atlanta Business Chronicle on a Tuesday morning, 4 paragraphs, buried in the commercial real estate section. Sterling's name appeared once, in a clause noting that Price and Associates had withdrawn from site acquisition negotiations. No explanation given, none required. The $40 million construction line of credit was called the same week. Sterling's lender had approved that facility on the explicit condition that the corridor contract would be executed within 90 days. The condition had not been met. The facility was due in full. Sterling did not have $40 million liquid. Sterling had never had $40 million liquid. He had had a corridor contract and a Porsche Cayenne and a lakefront house in Stone Mountain, and the absolute unshakable confidence that the deal was going to close. Week 4, Price and Associates commercial partners entered receivership proceedings. A court-appointed receiver took control of the company's assets and accounts. Sterling's personal guarantee on the credit facility was triggered, meaning the lender could now come directly for him, not just the company. The Stone Mountain house, purchased 2 years prior with a jumbo mortgage that assumed the corridor windfall, was listed for sale under circumstances that real estate agents describe professionally as distressed, and everyone else describes accurately as desperate. Sterling called Vanessa and told her things were complicated. She asked how complicated. He told her it was temporary. She had heard that word before from a different man, and she had not liked how it tasted then either. Week 6. A process server knocked on the door of the Cascade Heights house on a Wednesday afternoon. Vanessa answered in her robe. She was served. She sat with the divorce papers for an hour before calling her attorney. Her attorney reviewed the filing, noted the attached financial disclosures, and called her back within the day. The Coles Family Land Trust was listed as a marital asset pending valuation determination with a current independent appraisal figure cited in the disclosure. $95.4 billion. Vanessa's attorney told her to sit down. Vanessa was already sitting. She sat differently after that. Week 7. Vanessa called the Human Resources Office at Westview Academy. She had resigned her assistant principal position in April, 4 months prior, on the strength of a future that was now in receivership. She asked about reinstatement. The HR coordinator was kind about it. The position had been posted, interviewed, and filled. There was nothing available at her level. She was welcome to apply for open positions as they became available. Vanessa thanked her and ended the call. She sat in the house on Cascade Heights, Everett's house as it happened, since the deed was in his name alone, and she did the arithmetic that she should have done a long time ago. Week 10. She moved into Patricia's house, which was the only option that presented itself. Patricia received her daughter with open arms and a tight expression that she could not quite control. The reverse mortgage servicer had sent a renegotiation notice to Patricia's address the same week, requesting a meeting about updated terms on the facility Patricia had taken out 4 years prior to fund a kitchen renovation and a new car. The timing was for Patricia catastrophic. The optics were worse. Week 12. The Atlanta Business Chronicle ran a full profile on a Thursday morning. The headline read, "The Quiet Heir: How a High School History Teacher Controls Atlanta's Most Valuable Undeveloped Land." The piece ran 1,200 words, included a photograph of Elijah Coles from 1962, and laid out the full history of the Coles family land trust from the first parcel purchased in 1938 to the current appraisal figure to the name of the sole trustee and beneficiary. Everett Coles, age 46, history teacher, JV basketball coach. That Sunday, Patricia Beaumont Washington walked through the doors of Greater Faith Baptist Church for the 9 o'clock service, same as she had done for 19 years, same as she had done in her best dress with her head up and her credentials preceding her like a weather front. All 3 deacons were standing near the entrance. One of them was holding the Business Chronicle, folded to the profile page. None of them said anything. They didn't need to. That evening, Vanessa Beaumont Washington Coles picked up her phone and dialed her husband's number for the first time in 6 weeks. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She called again the next morning. This time he answered. His voice was calm. It was always calm. He told her the name of a law office on Peachtree Street and a time on Tuesday afternoon. Then he hung up. Everett arrived at Webb and Carmichael 20 minutes early. He sat in the same waiting area where he had sat months before, with the same composed hands and the same quiet face, and he declined coffee again. Langston Webb came out to greet him, to lead him back to the conference room, and took his seat at the far end of the table. Renata Okafor was already there, her portfolio open, a single pen placed parallel to its edge. The room was cool and still and smelled faintly of leather and recirculated air. Everett sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Vanessa arrived at 2:15 with her attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who specialized in high-asset divorce and had an office in Midtown and a reputation for aggression that had, in this case, been rendered entirely decorative by the terms Okafor had already constructed. Vanessa walked in wearing a cream blazer and the careful posture of a woman who had decided, somewhere between the parking deck and the 14th floor, that she was going to control this room. She looked at Everett. He looked back at her, and his expression gave her nothing to hold on to. Fitch made preliminary remarks about the possibility of a negotiated settlement, about the mutual benefit of resolution, about the shared history of his client and Everett. He used the word collaborative twice. Vanessa nodded along, and for a moment it appeared she believed the framing she had brought into the room with her. That this was a conversation, that there was something still to discuss, that Everett Coles had called her here to find a way back to something. Everett let Fitch finish, then he spoke. And once he began, No one interrupted him because the way he spoke made interruption feel structurally impossible, not because of volume or heat, but because of precision. Every word was placed deliberately, like a man who had been carrying a weight for a long time and was finally setting each piece of it down on a table where it could be examined. He said he wanted to account for something before they discussed numbers. He began with the first Sunday dinner at Patricia's table in 2012. He named the dishes that had been served. He described the way the Beaumont Washington name had been introduced and the tone in which it had been introduced and what that tone was designed to communicate. He moved through the years methodically. The Christmas of 2016, the promotion announcement, the Tuesday evening in Patricia's kitchen when he had been standing 6 feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee, and learned that he was, in the vocabulary of the people in that house, Vanessa's situation. Vanessa's composure held through most of this. She kept her eyes level. She kept her hands still. Gerald Fitch made a note he did not actually need to make. Then Everett came to June. He described the driveway in detail, the heat, the porch. Damon and Theo arranged against the railing. Sterling's keys extended without eye contact, without a word, as though handing them to a valet or a man whose name you don't need to know. He described filling the bucket. He described working the chamois cloth along the passenger window and reading, without looking for it, the blue stamped text on the folder sitting on Sterling Price's passenger seat. Southern Logistics Corridor, Site Acquisition, Phase 2. He told Vanessa that he had recognized those words because he had a letter on his desk at home with the same words on it. A letter from Webb and Carmichael, requesting trustee instruction on a letter of intent filed by Price and Associates Commercial Partners, a letter that had been sitting unopened for 6 weeks while Everett gave Sterling Price's car the most thorough wash it had ever received. The composure cracked then, just slightly. A shift in Vanessa's eyes. Not grief yet, not collapse, but the first recognition that the floor of the room was not where she had thought it was. Everett continued. He explained the trust. He explained Elijah. He explained 1,400 acres and a timber rights negotiation in 1967 and a fireproof box under the floorboards of a house in Macon and a handwritten note that said, "Hold it, don't perform it, let it work quietly." He explained the current valuation. He explained that Sterling Price had deposited $2.2 million in non-refundable earnest money in pursuit of land that belonged, through a lineage of patience and discipline that stretched back to 1938, to the man Sterling had handed his car keys to without looking at. He let that land. Vanessa's attorney stopped making notes. Vanessa herself sat very still, in the way people sit still when they are trying to prevent something inside them from becoming visible. The calculation was gone from her eyes. The composure was gone. What was left was something rawer and quieter, the particular expression of a person realizing, all at once and too late, the full dimensions of what they did not know. Everett looked at her steadily. "You spent 12 years bringing me onto that porch to remind me what I wasn't, Vanessa. You handed me his keys and smiled. What you didn't know was that the man you handed me those keys for had been begging for 8 months for permission to build on my grandfather's land." The room held that sentence for a long moment. Then Everett reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. The divorce settlement. Renata Okafor had spent 3 weeks constructing it to be fair, complete, and legally airtight in every direction. Vanessa would receive what she was entitled to under Georgia marital property law, and not $1 more. The trust, as a premarital inherited asset, had been argued and documented as separate property. Fitch would find the argument sound. He already knew it. Everett stood. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket the way his father had taught him. He thanked Langston Webb by name. He thanked Renata Okafor by name. He nodded to Gerald Fitch. He looked once more at Vanessa, briefly and without malice, the way you look at a chapter you have finished and will not reread. Then he walked out of the conference room, through the waiting area, into the elevator and out through the lobby doors into a Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta that was warm and bright and entirely, finally, his own. He did not look back. Not once. The settlement was signed within 2 weeks, quietly, efficiently, exactly as Renata Okafor had constructed it to be. And then Everett Coles got on with his life. Sterling Price's receivership was finalized in the fall. His personal assets, the Stone Mountain house, the Porsche Cayenne, a collection of watches that had been purchased to signal a particular kind of arrival, were liquidated in sequence to satisfy the personal guarantee on the credit facility. After the liquidation, after the attorneys and the creditors and the court costs had taken their portions, Sterling Price left Atlanta with considerably less than he had arrived with, and no forwarding address that anyone in the city's commercial real estate community chose to record. He did not make a statement, he did not give interviews, he simply disappeared in the way that men disappear when they have nothing left to perform. Vanessa returned to education, not to Westview Academy, where her position had been filled, and not at the administrative level she had held before. And she took a classroom position at a school in DeKalb County, a lateral move that required her to explain, in the interview, why she had stepped away from a promising career trajectory. She answered the question carefully. She was hired. She drove to work each morning past neighborhoods she had once considered beneath her, and said nothing about it to anyone because there was nothing to say. Patricia Beaumont Washington stepped down from the Finance Stewardship Committee at Greater Faith Baptist Church in October. The congregation accepted her resignation with the particular gentleness that communities extend to people whose humiliation is already complete. She remained in her pew on Sundays. She continued to wear her best clothes, but the position at the front of the room, the place where she had stood for 19 years as a woman of consequence and authority, was occupied now by someone else, and Patricia sat in the body of the church like everyone else, which was for her a punishment more precise than anything a court could have ordered. Her reverse mortgage renegotiation cost her $1,200 a month more than she had been paying. She did not discuss this with her children. Everett went back to school on the first day of the fall semester and stood in front of his third period class and picked up exactly where he had left off the previous spring. He coached Tuesday practices. He graded papers on Sunday evenings with the radio on low. Gospel in the morning, jazz afternoon, which was what his mother had always done and which had always felt, to him, like the correct order of things. He was the same man he had been before any of it. That was the point. That had always been the point. He gave one interview in November to a journalist from a black-owned Atlanta outlet called the Peach Street Review. The journalist was 26 years old and asked good questions. Everett answered them without embellishment. He talked about Elijah. He talked about the land. He talked about what it meant to hold something quietly and let it work. The piece ran on a Thursday and was shared widely, and Everett read it once, found it accurate, and did not read it again. He established the Elijah Coles Community Land Foundation in December, with Webb and Carmichael handling the legal structure and Everett serving as founding board chair. And the foundation's first initiative was 40 affordable homes to be built on trust-adjacent acreage outside Macon, 3-bedroom houses on quarter-acre lots deeded outright to working families who had been on waiting lists for years and had stopped believing the lists meant anything. The groundbreaking was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late January, which was the same month Elijah had bought his first parcel of land, 86 years before. Everett arrived early. He was standing near the equipment staging area, reviewing a site map with the project coordinator, when a woman walked over and introduced herself. Her name was Simone Archer. She was coordinating a literacy partnership between the foundation and the Macon County Public Library System, a reading initiative that would operate out of the community center planned for the same development. She had a clipboard, a practical coat, and the manner of a person who asks real questions because she is actually interested in the answers. She asked Everett what his grandfather had been like. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said Elijah had been a man who understood that real power doesn't announce itself, that the land doesn't care who you think you are, only what you do with what you've been given. Simone listened to all of this without interrupting, which Everett noticed, and when he finished, she said, "That sounded like a man worth building something for." Everett agreed that it did, and they stood there for another few minutes before the program began, talking about the library partnership, about the families on the waiting list, about what Macon had been, and what it might still become. It was a brief conversation. Nothing was announced, nothing needed to be. A man does not become powerful in the moment he is recognized. He becomes powerful in the moment he decides what the power is for. Elijah Coles understood that in 1938, standing at the boundary of 40 acres of red Georgia clay that nobody else wanted, Everett Coles understood it on a June Saturday in a driveway in Cascade Heights, holding a bucket and a chamois cloth and the full weight of everything that had been quietly waiting for him to act. Now the shovel was in his hands, the land was beneath his feet, and it had always been his. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Everett's position? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have made sure everyone on that porch knew exactly whose land they were standing near? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you the way Elijah's story moved me, hit that like button one more time so others can find it. And if you are new here, subscribe. We have more stories just like this one waiting for you. I will see you in the next video.